So welcome everyone to this month's webinar called How to Manage Data Privacy While Managing Records. My name is Jen Nelson, VP Strategic Solutions at Valora. Like, I had to pause to think about that for a minute. And Sandy Surkis, who is our co-founder and CEO here at Valora as well. So welcome to today's webinar. Today we are talking about managing privacy while managing records, and this is number 2 of our series this year, our webinar series. If you haven't registered for the other ones, I encourage you to go to the website and register for our upcoming ones. Breaking news as of this morning, our Black Cat 5.0 demo day will be in June, so expect a date for that one shortly. That will be our next webinar. And then kind of a follow-on from this one, as we talk data privacy today, we'll be talking data minimization and least privilege in the fall. So if you're interested in this topic and want to get a little deeper, I encourage you to register for that one. So, so next slide, Sandy. Oh yeah, helpful hints for today. So we love questions. Between both Sandy and I, someone will be looking at the chat or the, what is it called in this one? Q&A. So please feel free to enter your questions in there and we will get to them as we go, or we'll save them for the end, but we like to kind of keep it as interactive as possible and answer them as we go. So we'll do that. After this webinar, you'll get a copy of the slides and you'll get a copy of the recording. We'll send you to YouTube for that so that you can look at this as long as you want for prosperity. To introduce, if you haven't attended a webinar from us before, I'll give you a little bit of background about Valora Technologies. Next slide, Sandy. We are a platform. It's a software as a service platform used by records managers, IG teams, legal teams, compliance, IT, to find and automate the identification, the classification, and the disposition of content across the enterprise. So it's a combination of technology, which is our SaaS platform, and certainly methodology with our over 20 years experience in doing this stuff. And what you get is this beautiful 360-degree view, single pane of glass of your entire data estate. Next slide. And why do we do this? Because we reduce risk and exposure. So we look for and discover and uncover dark data, inform and action content, again, regardless of where it lives, and ensuring compliance. And the three big risks that we solve for are here. Data governance risk. So do I know where my stuff is and what it is? A privacy risk, which we're going to really talk about today. Does the information that I'm holding contain sensitive data? And if so, who has access? How long do I keep it, etc.? And then, of course, the compliance risk. Does my data exist out in places where it shouldn't be, or does it exist at all when it shouldn't be existing? So this is really what we solve for. Next slide. And the reason we do is because every single business, doesn't matter how big or how small you are, have kind of the same data governance challenges. We've got all this data in different kinds of repositories, structured, unstructured, on-prem, cloud, hybrid. And the big question is, what do we have and where is it and what is it and who owns it and what retention schedules do I apply to it? What contains private data? What doesn't? What can be open? What needs to be confidential? And we have this kind of process that we do to identify this, where we find and locate information. We inventory and analyze with the full text analytics to figure out what it is. We tag it to say, this is what it is by doc type. We action it anywhere across the organization. And then we delta monitor and ensure that anything new or edited is kind of all brought up into this single pane of glass view. Because when you do that and you have that visibility and that knowledge, you know exactly what we have, exactly where it is, who owns it, what it contains, and so on and so forth. So that makes us a little different by having this idea of true auto-classification, doing this full text analytics. We're repository agnostic, so it doesn't really matter where your data lives, it's going to be accounted for. A strategic approach, and this is really what Sandy's going to talk about today, is that kind of cross-functional use of auto-classification. It's not just for records in IG, like traditional records anymore. It really does have this overarching umbrella. So that's what we're going to to talk about today. So that is a little bit about us, a little bit about you. We asked you some questions when you registered, kind of what your role is and where you're coming from. So a lot of people around the table are the right kinds of people. So lots of records and information management folks. And I said this last time during the webinar that there was a lot of, I would say from even this time last year or 2 years ago, there's a lot of those RIM roles that have those other kind of facets to it: compliance, data privacy and security, and knowledge management. So you can kind of see where that umbrella is kind of spreading, right? And what are your biggest challenges? There was a lot of cleanup and rot reduction, a lot of privacy, a lot of managing retention, but there was a lot of, oh my God, everything. So you've come to the right place. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And Sandy, do you want me to do that? Let me just run through the agenda before I hand it over to Sandy then. So we're going to be running through kind of what is data privacy and why should you care? How to manage records and data privacy under one single strategy and initiative. We're going to talk DSARs because that's a big data request from these privacy regulations. Spoiler alert, AutoClassification is going to help you get there. And then how to advocate for the rest of your troops, for your organization-wide collaborative approach to data privacy. So it's on everybody's mind, everybody's thinking it, it's everybody's problem. And then of course, how to get started. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sandy. And again, if any Q&A that you've got going on, put it in the chat bubble and we'll answer as we go.
All right, thank you, Jen. That was a great overview, very much appreciated. And we're ready to dive in. We have a lot to cover today, and I'm a New Yorker, so I talk fast. So here we go. Just in case you don't know, what do we mean by data privacy? I try to explain it with an information governance lens. So not just what is it kind of in the abstract, but what is it to you? So data privacy is essentially this concept that says individuals, people, consumers, you and me, patients, have the right to kind of control their own personal data. Personal data is data about you that identifies you or reflects your personal nature. So things like your personal health information, your home address, your banking information, all of that is considered personal data. And data privacy is the area of expertise and regulation and management around your personal data. So in an information governance context, data privacy is about the proper handling of sensitive data. Now, sensitive can have different types of sensitivity, and data can have more than one type of sensitivity at the same time. But when we say data privacy in IG, we mean the management of that data. So this is really what it covers. Again, this is just Data Privacy 101. We're just dipping our toe in now. All right. The big thing, why does everybody talk about data privacy, is, of course, the regulations. And while 2018, with the introduction of GDPR, kind of kicked off the discussion in a big way, GDPR itself was a kind of a redux of a 2016 set of laws. Data privacy isn't exactly a new concept. It just keeps gaining steam and becoming more and more important because it's becoming regulated. And the more we move into kind of an AI-oriented society, the ever more important personal, like the whole concept AI isn't all that personal, the more important personal data privacy becomes. So this is just becoming the topic of the year. Oops. So, for example, why is this important now? If you don't know the IAPP, IAPP.org, I highly recommend you go visit that website. They have all kinds of information for beginners, intermediate, and advanced. And one of the biggest things that they do is track privacy legislation all over the world. This is from the US section. And what I find, why is this so important now? Why does Sandy keep banging this drum? Is just to show you how quickly this is moving. This picture is from a presentation I gave in August 2023, all of, 6-8 months ago. This is how much this picture has changed since February. Okay, how much? So anything that's blue here means that it's in progress, and anything green means that the legislation has passed. So let's just look at that again. This was August. This is February. Okay, and so this is what's happening in the United States. We have been unable to come together for a federal law, and there are many reasons for that. Happy to talk about that one offline. But it looks like we're going to have this patchwork of data privacy regulation in the United States for quite some time, which just kind of increases the complexity and the onus on all of you, because now you have to track 50 different regulations instead of one just to do business in the United States. All right, the other big thing that, as I said, that IAPP tracks, they track two big things, the regulation, and then of course the fines. A lot of these regulations have a punitive side to them for organizations that fail to comply. And so they are tracking both the laws themselves, the terms of those laws, and the fines that have been accrued. So this is an example of one of their fabulous charts. Find your state, see what's in and out in your particular state, and go through. Obviously, if you're a national or an international business, they all apply to you. Lucky you. Good news, there's still time to get on top of it. A lot of these laws, they go into effect in the future, or they go into effect next year, and they have a kind of grace period for compliance. So again, you have time to get on top of it. So good for you for attending this webinar. Okay, so since the bulk of you are records management folks, why have you not deleted all that rot that you know is out there? And this is what we hear back. Well, we don't have any tools, and I'm not going to sit there and delete one by one. I mean, you can, and you ask your users or your colleagues to do that, but realistically, that's not removing a lot of rot. Or we can't find the rot. It's mixed in with the good stuff, and nobody wants to, be responsible for that. Which takes us to the big answer. Of course, nobody will let us, or nobody wants to delete anything. Well, that was okay when we were in records management only land, and we just kind of said, where we had this notion of, well, this is how long we must keep stuff at a minimum. That doesn't really fly in the data privacy land, as we will learn in just a moment. So historically, we're kind of coming off of this viewpoint of there was no real penalty to just keep it forever. Meh, we're violating our records retention schedule, but meh, that's okay. There are real consequences to data privacy regulation for just keeping it. And some of them are quite onerous. So this is because of the time windows, and we're going to get into that. It gives the information governance folks, all of you, a little more ammunition in your quiver to say, hey, we really do need to get rid of this rot. We really do need to get rid of this stuff that's past retention. It's not just a smart, good idea because of records. It's the law for compliance with data privacy. Okay? In fact, if you take nothing else out of this webinar today, this orange box is the thing to take. All right. You are going to get this response from people. So we're out of compliance. What's the big deal? So here you go. You can be ready. Slam. There's the big deal. Just slap that down and say, do you want to be one of these companies? Are you one of these companies? Oh boy, those are in euros, by the way. Big money for violating data privacy compliance. The two things to know, okay, about how do you kind of show compliance is you have to kind of practice what you preach. So if you have policies, say like a records retention policy or a what's called data minimization policy, in other words, how long we will keep the sensitive data that is provided to us. If you have policies that state that, both the duration of how long you'll keep these things and the purpose of why you have these things, if you have those as policies, then you must prove that you are executing according to the policy. things like, well, we just keep it forever, really not in compliance, that's when you're going to get slammed. Or, well, we collected this information for this purpose and we kind of sort of slid it into this other purpose. Wham, that's where you're going to get hit.
And we've got a question. I think there's a good time for it. Question is, if you have 1 minute to give an elevator pitch to executive leaders to address this question, storage is cheap. Why are we spending time and money reducing rot? What would you say in that 1 minute to address that question?
I will give you a pithy short answer. Storage is cheap and litigation is expensive. Okay, which would you rather be paying? Furthermore, if you reduce your cost on storage, then you have a lot more money to be able to spend on intelligent, smart things. Just because storage is cheap doesn't mean that you should be overutilizing it. And as a big Simpsons fan, if any of you remember, there's an episode where Marge goes into a big box store like a Costco or a Sam's and picks up this massive bag and goes, "Ooh, that's a good price for 10 pounds of nutmeg." That is what I feel when someone says, well, storage is cheap. You're buying 10 pounds of nutmeg when you need a teaspoon. Why are you doing that? Let alone the risk and the non-compliance in the litigation. So that's actually a horrific cost for 10 pounds of nutmeg.
And Jesse's got a good comment here in the comments too with a one-liner. AI works better with good data, which is totally right. If you are going to even think about dipping your toe in the world of AI and using your data for it, having rot in there don't even bother. Right. Yeah.
Completely agreed. Thank you to whoever posted that.
And Donda says, develop risk and compliance controls in your org for senior leaders to attest to each year, which will support the policies you've created.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So we've been up at this level of kind of what is data privacy and compliance and the kind of high level. We're going to go one level down now, which is, what do we mean when we talk about data privacy rights? There are, in general, these 6 rights. Some states have slightly different ones. Some states don't have all of them exactly. But by and large, these are the areas that are considered individual data privacy rights. So the right to access means I get to know, what do you have on me? Rectification means I have the right to fix it. Like, that's not actually my address or my age or my phone number, whatever. Removal, that's the big one, the right to be forgotten, which is I want you to forget about me. I want you to remove what you have on me. Restriction means I want you to restrict either what you can do with my data or who has access to it. Portability means I can take, like that with me. Like if I change cell phone providers, I can keep my cell phone number. And of course, opt-in, meaning you don't just sign me up for things. I get to choose what I opt into. So those are the big general areas of data privacy rights. There is a new emerging big topic, and it's funny because some of these slides come from last year. It was emerging last year. Now it is the big topic, which is the purpose. Why do you have this data? And in records management, information governance, why isn't the biggest question that we typically answer? The biggest question we typically answer is time. How long? What's its retention? When can I get rid of it? It's sort of when is the prevailing question. And in data privacy, the prevailing question is why? Why do you have this? What are you using it for? Why do you still have it? And why haven't you gotten rid of it? Okay, so that is all known as data minimization. Okay, and that, of course, is the topic for our October webinar. So that is part 2 of today's part 1, where we're just covering data privacy in general. All right. So data minimization, this idea of why do you have it? What are you going to use it for? How long exactly are you going to keep it? And how can you prove to me that you've gotten rid of it? Not just me. How can you prove to the regulators that you've gotten rid of it? So data minimization, which is this kind of art form of data privacy, is becoming the standard of care, basically, in data privacy regulation. It started with West Virginia in the United States, and all of the other states have been kind of tacking that on and saying, yes, 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 this is the way. Here are some examples. CPRA has it. GDPR, of course, has it. There are other, so the ones on top have been signed into law. The ones on the bottom are pending, but you can see these are more federal proposals, and you can see that kind of language about data minimization, either spelled out directly or kind of the concept of that. So data minimization becoming ever more important, and it is a combination of timing, which you guys are used to, and purpose, which is a little bit, you're used to it in the sense of assigning a record class, but that tends to be the extent of it. Now you really have to get into the nitty-gritty of the data itself. Why is this on the plate? Okay, so this kind of, you can already hear me kind of got one foot in each camp here. Are we talking about privacy? Are we talking about records? And of course the answer is yeah, both, because they go seamlessly in and out of each other. So let's just take what data privacy responsibilities tend to involve. You'll see the word sensitive show up, either sensitive meaning it's sensitive to the organization or it's sensitive to the person. You can think of that as PII or personal data. What sensitive data do we have? Where is it? Who can see it? And are we handling it correctly? Meaning either correct with the laws or correct with best practice or correct per our own policies. What is out there that maybe wasn't supposed to be, either because of the nature of the content that it is or because we said it would not be? And then can I produce? This is that what's called a DSAR, a data subject access request. That's fancy talk. It's GDPR talk for I am an individual and I'd like to know what you have on me, please. So I, as the data subject, am going to make an access request of you, the organization, that is what you got over there on me. I'd like you to forget me. That's a DSAR, okay? And the way that an organization responds to a DSAR is with generally a data production, just like an e-discovery, but much faster, 30 to 45 days, and much more detailed about an individual. So that is kind of the data privacy kind of view of files and content responsibility. And the reason that we crossed out the word privacy in the title is because this should sound real familiar to all of you. Just we didn't kind of have the word sensitive stuck in there. We might have said records. Which information do we have that are records? Where are records located? Who has access to records? Are we handling our records? Right? If you just interplay records and sensitivity together, you will see the complete and obvious overlap here. So when you're talking to an auto classification provider, these are essentially the same task. You would just do them both at the same time. You would say, what is this information in general? Is it a record? And if so, what record attributes, class, retention, etc.? Or is it sensitive? And what kind of sensitivity attributes? Oh, is it PII? Is it about a customer? Do we have it only for a limited time window? Blah, blah, blah. So you can kind of see how from an analysis or classification standpoint, you're just going to kind of go down these paths in tandem. So we really view these as essentially the same task, different lenses, but the same effort. Maybe a good time to stop, Jen, for questions?
We're good for questions.
All right, booking on through. So these are the typical kind of rot and retention classification tags. Yes, from the point of view of auto classification, but frankly, also manual. You know, I pity you if you're doing this manually, but I know it does go on. But it's a lot easier to do with auto classification. And these are the general pile. There can be all levels of subtlety. And you can see one of them here on the left. You know, is this rot, yes or no? Can you get, all right, well, what kind of rot? Well, it's obsolete. Why is it obsolete? Well, because it's past its retention. Or if you want a more data privacy flair, it's obsolete. Why is it obsolete? Because it's past the amount of time that we said we would keep that based on the day we collected it or the purpose under which we collected it, called the basis. Again, getting a little bit into the October webinar there. But the same kind of discipline, thinking, tags, handling are all in play for records classification and data privacy, you might as well merge the two together. So here's your kind of more typical records management view on classification tags. Here are the data privacy ones, very, very similar. What do you have? Does it contain employee information? That could also be down here, customer information. Do you have the customer's home address because you are doing delivery routing? Do you have, personal health information because you're a pharmaceutical? So these are the types of things. Note here on the right, retention period, expiration handling. Those were on the other slide too, because they have the same kind of concept of what is the permissible window, what is the date by which you have to delete it, and again, not to get into too much detail here, but what is the rationale behind the collection of this data and the making of these tags? Okay, so you might tag for records, you might tag for data privacy. What that ultimately does is pull you up into this kind of bird's eye view, this dashboard view that lets you look across the entire data estate or any subset. So now I can look and go, okay, what's the personal data story in our organization? Okay, it looks like, we have maybe 20% of our content has personal data in it. So the blue would be the yes here. Okay, all right, well, what kind of personal data? How at risk are we? Well, wow, we got a lot of PII out there. So of course you do. And what kind of PII? Well, we have social security number, we have date of birth, things like that. So you can get as granular and detailed as you need to get. That's one of the big benefits of auto classification. So you can follow like as deep down or as many. This document here has date of birth, SSN, home address, age of minors, vehicle identification number, you name it. It has 14 different elements of personal data. This is a crazy sensitive document. So that is, again, what the auto classification brings you is that level of detail, that level of tagging, and of course the consistency across the population, so that if you're looking for social security number, you're getting it across, not just because this group over here was diligent about it and that group less so. You're going to get the full picture. Okay, so what you're looking at here, these are actual screenshots from Valora's application called Black Hat. If you would like to see our hot off the presses Black Hat 5, these are screenshots from Black Hat 5. We'll be doing demo day in June. And we'd love to have you come and see, how this gets done, and we'll play with it and we'll demo it and all the fun stuff. For today, we're just on screenshots. All right. So Sandy, you mentioned these DSARs. Walk me through it. Okay, here you go. So remember, these are the things that a data subject, a person, may request of the organization. Okay, so the most common one, delete my data, please. All right, so what's involved in that? What do you mean delete my data? I got to find your data. First, do we even have any data on you? Okay, this is what most organizations are struggling with. Well, I worked there for 17 years. Well, yeah, okay, we probably have some data on you, particularly if we've not been incredibly diligent about actual deletion when things were past retention. Even though you stopped working here 10 years ago, maybe we still do have some of your data, right? Okay, so what goes on when somebody literally creates a DSAR request or data subject access request? That's usually some sort of web form on your website, or they could write a letter or make a phone call and say, I'm officially launching my DSAR. Okay, so then a bunch of groups kick into gear. Your data privacy team will be like, okay, we've got a DSAR. We have XX days to respond because that employee is based in New Hampshire, and these are the requirements in New Hampshire. And then records say, okay, records, what do we have? Where is it? Okay, well, give me a second. I got to search everything because he was an employee for 17 years. Dude is all over the place. But time out. No, we need to keep some of those for longer, so we can't delete those. So now I have to separate into this is deletable, this is not deletable. So I think I've got the deletable pile when, of course, legal jumps in and goes, excuse me, Yeah, some of that's under legal hold. You won't be deleting anything. So now you have a much more complex and nuanced response to this person. In general, 30 days to respond. This is an incredibly tricky problem if you don't already know where your stuff is, already have it tagged for it belongs, it mentions this employee, it's under legal hold, it has these attributes. And note, I didn't mention the one in the corner here. Just because somebody asks to be deleted, that doesn't necessarily mean you just automatically kind of blank check, go ahead and delete things. Things have to be evaluated. Obviously, if they're under legal hold, you're not deleting them. If they're still within their records retention period, there's some discussion. Records and legal can have that argument as to whether that gets deleted or not. It may depend on the nature of the information. And then there's when that employee's data is intermingled with other employee data or customer data intermingled, what gets deleted and what not. That can get very tricky if you have an immutable source where the requester is mixed in with non-requesters. Again, there are answers to all of these, but the questions do need to be asked, and auto classification is going to help you a lot be able to get to the answers, because the answers presume you have some ability to actually divide and conquer your content across these lines. And by the way, the regulations assume that too. So, calling up the regulator and going, well, we have no way to tell whether people are listed on this document or not, is absolutely not going to fly. Or we don't really know where we used to keep employee data, so we're not sure. That is just, none of that is going to fly. You will be sanctioned. So you have to be able to respond along the lines of these little talking bubbles here. Which brings us to the obvious point. Privacy and records must coexist. In my personal opinion, they should be co-responsible in the same organizational group. I always kind of give a little bit of side eye when I hear, oh yeah, privacy's all the way over there, and we're records over here. We have nothing to do with each other. I'm like, really? That seems very expensive to me and labor intensive, because you're going after the same thing, which is, why do we have stuff and how long can we keep it and when do we have to get rid of it? Why not join forces, share the budget, share the tools, share the best practices, and have it be a single area? But I don't get to affect the organizational structure of every single organization I talk to. So I do hear you that it's not always the case. So if you're not in the same organization, then you have to learn to coexist and to understand that DSAR activity is legal and can very much interfere with or affect the activities happening in kind of day-to-day RIM. So a DSAR will definitely kind of mess up normal disposition. They often will supersede other deletion activities, and they certainly mess with the time calculations. So not surprisingly, you can kind of get into this three-way war between what record says is the duration, between what privacy says is the duration, and what legal says is the duration. By and large, in the United States, legal is going to win that battle. If something's under legal hold, that's going to win. However, that is not necessarily the case in Europe. It is quite possible, quite common, that the DSAR, the individual, is going to win that. Okay, so definitely this is the kind of thing, if you have international customers, international employees, you might actually have different regulations affecting them and have to have different retention schedules based upon whether the individual in question is a European citizen or a United States citizen. And we're rapidly getting to the point of, and which state are they a citizen in? Because it might be very different. So we're obviously setting up a heck of a lot of it depends. And again, in order to answer it depends, you're going to have to be able to answer questions about dates, rationale, employee name, where things are stored, why they're stored that way, who's mentioned. All of that kind of stuff is going to come up for discussion to be able to resolve the it depends questions. So that seems like a good place for me to stop if any questions have come up, Jen.
No questions. We're good.
All right, I'm going to keep blowing through.
Keep going.
All right, so Sandy, yeah, auto classification, of course. Basically, auto classification does make a lot of what I've described so far not only possible and easy, but almost, I would say, essential to be able to answer questions of this level of granularity. So how do tools like auto classification help establish, manage, and maintain the principles of data privacy? So I have a whole bunch of them here. I'm not going to go through every single one. When we send you this slide deck, please note that on the bottom of this page is a huge, long description of each one of these and what they bring to the table. I will talk about, let's say, my favorite two. So I'll start with the one in the corner. Obviously, the ability to identify sensitive data. So if you don't really know what you have, or you have areas in your organization where the content could kind of be anything because it was open to users and they could have just stuck stuff there, looking at you, all you shared drives over the years, or your abandoned SharePoint sites, the kind of the number one thing that auto classification brings to the table is the what is this? What is the document type? What's inside it? Does it contain sensitive data? Is it a record? That kind of ID, is kind of incomparable. And can you do it manually? Yeah, but it will take you forever, and the volume of data will far outpace your abilities to do that. So using auto classification, of course, is a huge win on that topic. And then my other favorite topic would be, so many. I guess I will go with data minimization in backup and archives, and because we have historically just kept everything, and that is just, it was sort of like, I view this sort of like what we've done with like nuclear waste. We just kind of store it underground and hope that our grandchildren's grandchildren figure out an answer. The problem is the regulation has come out now, not for our grandchildren's grandchildren, it's for us. So we have to kind of come up with a solution. You can only kick the can so far. So what I like is that auto classification is essentially repository or source agnostic. So it can go into your backup, it can go into your archives, it can go into your abandoned, SharePoint sites, it can go into that sunsetting, old ECM that you have, and just do its bit on all of those areas and bring it together in a central pane of glass that says, okay, this is what we have in the sunsetting archive, this is what we have in abandoned SharePoint sites, this is what's in Drive XX, and just kind of bring that all together. Even if you, the individual, don't necessarily have the ability to go and personally query one of them, let the software do its bit and bring it to you. So those would be the two, I guess, the two bookends on the upper left and the upper right as my two favorite. I like them all and highly recommend you read through the rest of this when we send it to you. Okay, so I have been generally assuming that most people know what auto classification is. Fortunately, that seems to be the case these days. Several years ago, we had to do a lot more explanation about that. If you are still a little mystified, I'm going to go through a super quick kind of, this is what it looks and feels like. So if you are looking at a SharePoint site, or you're looking at file share, this is what you get for information about a file. It doesn't really tell you very much about LGPIF. What is this? Does it contain sensitive data? Do I have to deal with this? Is it subject to that DSAR? So what auto classification does is kind of do its little crawling bit, encounter something like this, and go into the actual content of the file, the body text, and say, okay, let's start cataloging everything we know about this document. Some of it might come from existing metadata if you're lucky enough to have it, but by and large, auto classification does not assume that there's any metadata. If it finds some, great, wonderful, but it's going to create its own metadata from an analysis of the content. So number one, it's going to figure out the document type, in this case, a contract. It's going to start to pull out all this important data facets, in other words, each item, and store that in a kind of database record about each file. So this contract, it's not affecting the contract. All you e-discovery mavens out there, it's not spoiling the document. It's just looking at it kind of over the fence and going, and keeping a tally about the document so that we can use that for analysis and presentation and reporting, and then later actioning without actually affecting the content of the document. And I'm stressing that because I was, quite frankly, stunned to hear at InfoNext a week ago out in California that there are solutions out there that do kind of a very lightweight version of this and literally tack their metadata into the file. Okay, fundamental, full stop, no. Do not undertake solutions that do that. You will literally spoil your entire e-discovery presentation.
I swear to God, at this very moment, there is a question that says, what are the advantages to using Black Hat versus Purview and other Microsoft internal products? So that's the biggest one.
Right. I wasn't going to call it out by name, but since you asked, just say no. What's the no?
Yeah.
To solutions that are literally going to alter metadata inside the file. That is a colossal no. You absolutely want that outside the file. You can put it into the SharePoint, the kind of metadata.
Mm-hmm.
That's all fine. Just don't affect the file itself. And that is possibly the number one reason to choose Black Hat over Purview. There are many other reasons. If you would like to hear about those, contact Jen or me. We have a whole working document on this topic.
You know what another big one was that actually really stuck out at me was the training the system. So Black Hat or Powerhouse or Purview or any other kind of AI solution needs to be told what to do. And Purview, I was surprised to learn that Purview needs an average of 50 documents to train one document type. So if you've got a contract, give me 50 and then we'll kind of get it. So that was a surprise to me because we need like 2. So that was also a big difference I found between Black Hat and Purview.
Yeah, and that would only be for contracts we've never encountered before.
Yes, yeah.
Valora's been in business for 20 years. We've seen a lot of contracts. So it would really only be for something quite unusual or unique to your organization that we would even require any. So that's another great. Again, there are many reasons you might want to choose one over the other, but apropos to the data privacy discussion, this is what we're going to kind of cover today. So back to what kind of Powerhouse, Black Hat, what they're doing. So pulling out this information, maintaining it in a separate metadata record that refers back to the original file, again, regardless of where it lives or it's in multiple copies. And then running kind of essentially a rules-based analysis that says, what is this? This looks like record class blah, and therefore its retention period is this, its expiration date is this. This is the mechanism or the workflow by which we need to delete it. Or I know that Donda's on the call somewhere, the play out of the playbook for handling this when it reaches its date. This is its sensitivity and therefore how it needs to be managed in the organization. Again, all of these have interesting workflows that result from them. And you here, you can see the interplay in the gray and blue area. The first kind of 3-ish items here are more records in flavor, and the last 2 are more data privacy in flavor. But as far as an auto-classification solution is concerned, you do them all together and you have them inform each other. Yes, it's this record class, but it's this kind of sensitivity. Therefore, how do you blend the 2 of those into its proper handling? So you might get it, do we retain it? Do we delete it? What if that's just sort of in general? What if it's subject to a DSAR? Do we retain or delete it? Takes on a very different meaning and certainly a different time window than it would without the DSAR. So this kind of technique, remember, we started here. We went from this kind of blind activity, blind knowledge about a file into this. And then ultimately, this is on a single file basis, ultimately to the dashboard that then says, yes, here's Black Hat 5, woo woo. All of each one of these little cards on here is, of course, one of those data facets that Valora is collecting from the content. And yet another reason not to shove metadata back into your file other than the spoliation is because if you're using a sophisticated classification tool, you might have 60, 70, 90 fields of useful metadata. You make your file twice as long as it was. You want to store that in a very efficient database format so that you can, kind of utilize those to do analysis or reporting or, mass activities. So again, you want to utilize a much more clever structure. So what you have here is essentially a UI, an application representation of the knowledge that the auto classification engine has learned. And you can see here, so kind of in the middle here, what is the personal data type? It's a little small. This says PII, PCI. What is the detail, the kind? And then not showing on the screen, you could have that right up against which ones are records, what record class, so that you could quickly in about 2 seconds say, I want to see all personnel records for active employees that contain sensitive data. Boom, click, click, done. Regardless of where they live in the organization. Are most of them in HR? Yes, let's hope so. But what's this pile out on a file share that somebody copied down one day 3 years ago and forgot about, right? That is what you want to hunt down. All right, so here's a great example of auto classification in action. This is a US, it's called the URL. When you apply for a mortgage to buy a house, you will be filling out one of these. This is a dummy one. I hope. I found it on the internet. I never checked to see if there's really people with this name. I really hope not.
Or Wilma and Brady, yeah.
One day I'm going to knock on their door and be like, about your URL.
About your data, yeah.
On the internet. This is way before AI training. So this is a URL. It is just chock full of personal data, social security number, date of birth, home address. It also has things that kind of indicate personal data, right? It says title will be held in whose names. So we have a name and an address, the subject property address. You can reasonably infer that they live there or are going to live there. So there's different kinds of PII. There's clear and present PII, and then there's likely PII. They all count as far as data privacy is concerned, and they all count as far as compliance, which is why you want to be able to get the likely types as well. Then there's stuff that's not PII. An interest rate floating in space is not particularly PII. My personal interest rate, you're right on the line. So this, we encounter this out open season on the shared drive somewhere. This is something that should be locked down. It doesn't belong there. This is a record for starters. This contains personal data and probably needs a certain kind of sensitivity handling, possibly even redaction. And it needs to be, let's say, moved into a more secure location. All of that identification of it, the tagging of it, the rules base, how should it be handled, and then the literal migration from X place to the proper place can all be done with auto classification. Most people don't always realize that. They think the classification is just the tag. It also can include the movement of the data, the deletion of the data, the actual remediation, including redaction if need be. So this is what we look like when we analyze a document for personal data. And then this is what we might look like if we're just looking for details about the information. I just want to know what kind of document is it and what date was this filed or whatever, what was the loan amount? Okay, the problem with this document is it contains both. It contains the sensitive information and the kind of like general business information. And we have historically just treated this as general business information. The problem is the fact that it also contains the sensitive data makes it subject to all of these regulations and a much more kind of volatile type of content than we probably considered when we captured that information. And that's the issue. We have to kind of catch our content up with the current way of thinking and the current regulations so that we don't get caught off guard. This house was acquired in 1996. Is this they're probably still paying the mortgage. is this URL just sitting out there when we used to just collect things willy-nilly and drop it in a share drive somewhere? Yeah, it probably is. And that's where the problems come up. Okay. So now I was giving you a hypothetical. Now I'm going to give you an actual example. Really, Jen's going to give you the actual example because this happened.
Yeah, so this little file that was sitting on my system called Scott JPG, and I have no idea what it is. So when I opened it, I realized that it was a photo of his passport. This is my little chicken nugget, Scott, when he was a little chicken nugget, because he's almost 18 now. But this file that I had that had no indication of it, just said Scott JPG, is literally a photo of his passport. So what AutoClassification can do, if this is sitting on your file share or you've accidentally uploaded it to your SharePoint site, with a tool like Valora, it will go through and it will create a text rendition of that. It will identify, wait a second, this is the passport because it's got a passport number, birth dates, whatever. And it will be able to tell you that, Jen, you really shouldn't put this on your SharePoint site. You saved it to the wrong spot. So that's also what can help, is helpful with an auto-classification tool. It's going to tell you what's there that shouldn't be there, but it can also has the ability, if it is supposed to be there, like when you ask your employees to send if you've got your travel agent who does everything, upload your picture of your passport, we can also auto redact. On the next slide, you'll see instances of in-app auto redaction, and we can also redact that at source as well. So that again, that data minimization in practice, essentially.
Okay, so now that you see like an absolute real world example, and good on Jen for sharing it, and it's hilarious to see Scott at this age because I have seen him recently. He's so tall.
He's like over 6 feet now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little different from this picture, but this is a great example of the kind of content that is out amongst your file shares. And so in this case, let's say Jen had submitted a DSAR and said, I'd like to know what you have on me or my family. This is typically what it looks like. Someone will come to a website, fill it out, and say, here's who I am. They do have to kind of prove their identity. They might share with you an employee ID number or some indication that they used to work for you, or they're a customer. They might share a bill with you, some way to say I'm legit. And then what it is that they want. I want you to tell me what you have, or I want you to delete it, or after the fact, now that I've looked at it, you need to fix everything you have on me is wrong. So there's an interactive kind of response workflow that happens here. So usually it goes like this. They fill out the web form. The web form receives that on the back end and immediately kicks off a search. If you were good and you've already auto-classified everything, that search will just take a couple seconds. If we have to auto-classify on the fly, maybe a couple of minutes, but not too bad. And then pull together a preliminary report for either then software to analyze further, or some organizations use a kind of a human, kind of like document review and e-discovery, they'll use a DSAR review of individuals to say, all right, here's everything that got collected. They can have this, they can't have that. This is under legal hold, and to pull together that production. Again, most responses have to be within 30 days. That's from the initial minute that the request is filed. If you're using auto-classification properly, you should be able to do it, I would say, in about 5 minutes. So you can just bear that in mind.
And we've got about 5 minutes, but we have a few minutes to go over if we've got time for questions.
And we're coming right to the end. So okay, Sandy, I'm a believer. I got it. How do I get my organization on board? And I know that's a constant theme in information governance. So first of all, who? These are the folks that are going to be your friends when we're trying to add data privacy into your universe, notably HR and legal, because legal is, of course, concerned about risk, and HR contains all the sensitive data about your employees. If you are a customer-heavy organization and you tend to have a lot of customer-sensitive data, then I would swap that in marketing into this picture. But basically, you're all kind of looking at content with a slightly different lens. And again, the trick is, instead of looking at it only through your minimum, kind of your limited view, learn to have a common goal and share it. You all need to get in here. Privacy is everybody's issue. So let's share the responsibility. Let's share the budget. Let's share the kind of planning and get that group on the same page. Have people understand that this is sort of for the greater good. It is a shared resource. It doesn't belong to records. It doesn't belong to legal. It belongs to everyone. So briefly, if you're going to be standing up a data privacy program, I'm going to give you 10 easy steps. These 5 are what you will need to be getting off the ground. We're going to talk about this much more in the October webinar, but if you want just the checklist, these are the things that you'll need to have at your fingertips. And these are the things that you will need to do. Some of them will come from just the pure kind of classification of data, a lot of these. And some of these are things that will require you to execute on them. But roughly, what you'll need and what you'll get. And then finally, these are our recommendations on how to get started. Always start with a pilot. A pilot is a small subset of data, a kind of limited scope effort. My recommendation on a set of data that's important enough that people care, but not so important that they're never going to let you touch it. Abandoned SharePoint sites is a good example, or abandoned, kind of departed employees, that sort of thing. Use the pilot to prove an ROI. It's very easy to do that. We talked earlier about just removing rot. That alone will typically prove out the ROI. All the other aspects that you get are just gravy after that point. And again, we've talked about this in other webinars, but measure how long it takes you to do stuff right now. If you had to fulfill a DSAR tomorrow, if a customer called with a DSAR tomorrow, how long would it take you to find everything, produce it, kind of clear out what needed to be cleared out, and then produce it off to the customer? Why don't you try one as a fire drill and see how long it takes you to get that together? Because that is going to become the basis that you build your ROI on. My instinct, if you don't have good systems, you don't have good controls, this is going to take you at least 3 months, 6 months to respond to something like that. You have 30 days to respond. And that's in addition to doing your regular job. So measure how long it takes to do things now without tools. And then that will become the thing that you can measure again once you implement that pilot to say, now it only took 2 seconds. Look at the difference. All right. So, okay, I get it. How long is it going to take? Just to set expectations, a typical onboarding with Valora takes about 2 months. Could take slightly longer if you have a more complex environment or you're trying to onboard, 14 different data repositories at the same minute. And of course, how much data do you have? Do you have 10 terabytes or 40 petabytes? Those are going to affect the timeline, but you can use 2 months as a rough rule of thumb. And we highly recommend, as we said, proof of concept pilot, that you kind of follow this implementation approach. Plan first. We're happy to help you. Put together that proof of concept, that pilot, schedule out your implementation, and then aim towards delta monitoring. Recognize that this is not a one and done. You're not going to just fix data privacy. It is an ongoing, forever, the way records management, information governance in general. Again, see that dovetailing. This is a forever thing, but what you can do is get it under control so that it's easy to do forever. And that's it. Everything amazing. You wanted about data privacy.
Yeah, in 60 minutes. Yeah, amazing. And now October is a long time between now and then. Maybe I should have thought about that planning a little better for data minimization. But if you've got questions or even just want to brainstorm about how this may apply to your data set, or to, how to eat the elephant in those bite-sized chunks, where to start, October's a long time. So here's our email address. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll maybe do a bit of a one-on-one session if that makes sense for you guys. We have just one question that we can get to. Again, these slides and the deck will be sent around if you do have to drop off, and I thank you for your time. The one question is, how does it manage false positives?
So There's a whole art to that. But basically, so for people who don't know, a false positive is when a file has been tagged with something and it doesn't actually contain it. Common use case here would be social security number. It says, hey, there's a social security number here, and there wasn't. There was just, it kind of followed the same kind of sequence, the 3, 2, 4 digit kind of sequence. So the first way to prevent false positives is to do better than just simple pattern recognition for something like that, to look for multiple indicators. So you're looking for the pattern sequence, you're looking for the letters SSN or social security number, or the big Valora technique, use the document type to help inform you, okay? You should not find social security number on a takeout menu. Like, that's going to be something else. So there are ways to be smarter about kind of how you recognize and tag sensitive information. Will you hit every single thing? Will you knock out all false positives? No. And that's on purpose, because when you tune these systems, you have a choice between, you can never be perfect. Let me be clear. You can get really good, 98, 99% accuracy. But so you have to tilt a little bit either towards a false positive or towards a false negative. And what we highly recommend is that you intentionally tilt, because you have to tilt one way, tilt towards false positive, because the greater sin is to miss a document that actually contained a social security number versus you called this one social security number, but it didn't actually have one. So that is why you will still see the occasional false positive. It's to prevent the greater sin from happening. You get the occasional lesser sin. So that's why that happens. If that is a specific area of concern for someone, contact me and I will walk you through the litany of tips and tricks to reduce that to the smallest possible amount.
Awesome. Great. Well, we're 3 minutes past the hour, so I think we'll wrap it at that. I don't see any other questions, but please, again, if you do have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our emails are there. And thank you, everyone, for your time this afternoon. Hope you have a great rest of your week.